Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. It was November 15th, 1940, and in the middle of the night, bombs began to rain down on the city of Coventry, England. It was in the heat of what would escalate into World War II. German planes were flying over England trying to disable some of the industrial and arms manufacturing centers. And in that, nearly the whole city of Coventry was leveled. 500 people would go on to lose their lives, 4,300 buildings destroyed. But all the same dawn, the sun rose over Coventry the next morning. Folks came up to the surface from the places where they were hiding, trying to keep safe, and they looked out at the damage that had been done. Many of those people stepped out of their houses and looked towards the center of the city, where the spires of St. Michael's Cathedral once pierced the sky. And in its place, they saw nothing. The cathedral had been leveled. All that was left were the skeletons of this medieval Gothic structure that once had been the center of the life of that city. Over the next weeks, folks from all over the city would come to look at the wreckage that had been done. And in that time, one man, an architect, started to pick his way through the rubble, to identify what was usable and what was not, with a dream of maybe one day seeing it restored. And there, in the destruction of the cathedral, he found two of the medieval beams, ancient wood that had survived for 500 years in that place. It was charred, was scarred, but there, laying against each other, the two pieces of wood formed the shape of a cross. So struck was the architect, that he picked up those two beams, secured them together, and placed them in the spot where the altar of the cathedral once stood. Remember that you were dust, and to dust you shall return. Those are the words that we hear every Ash Wednesday. As one places the sign of the cross and ash on your forehead. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. It's a reminder that we are all finite creatures, that this physical body that we invest so much time and effort in maintaining and preserving will ultimately return to the earth from which it came. And such is the fate of everything that humans make, all of our physical things. The mightiest cathedral will fall to rubble, whether under the blast of bombs or just the slow, steady movement of time. Countries rise up and fall. Empires are formed and dissolved. Over the course of our lives, we acquire homes and cars and 401k plans and all of the things that we fill the many drawers in our house that someday we won't know where it came from or what we should do with it. All of it will fade away. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The invitation of Ash Wednesday in those words, and the invitation that we'll offer in just a moment to the observance of Holy Lent, is all about taking stock of our lives. It's about seeing the reality of the lives that we live, the fact that all the stuff that occupies so much of our time will ultimately fade away. And it forces us to ask the question, about all that, who am I? Who am I? separated from everything that made up their lives. And yet here they are, streaming back to that place to encounter the rubble of the home that they once knew some decades later. And in this reading, and so for so much of the book of Isaiah, Isaiah is challenging the people of Israel to ask themselves, who are we? Who are we becoming? When we make it back to our homeland, will we just go back to our normal patterns and routines? Will we reinvest in the buildings and the stuff of our lives? Or will we accept the gift of a transformed life that God has given us in returning us from our exile? Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up. The invitation God speaks through the prophet Isaiah is an invitation to new life. It's an invitation not just to go back to the way things were, but to invest in their community. To see one another and the needs of their fellow neighbors, their fellow Israelites, and to respond in love. He's inviting them to build new foundations, not of stone or of wood, sand or mud, but a foundation of love, of caring, of compassion, of interdependence within the community, each member of the nation relying on one another. Because stone and brick and mortar and wood fade away. But the love that God has made known to God's people and the love that God calls those same people to show to one another, that does not fade. Do not store up your treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, but store up your treasures in heaven. Matthew, in so many ways, echoes the sentiment of the prophet Isaiah, calling on the people to recognize what in their lives, the things that they are attached to, the things that they care so much about, that are simply fading away. But instead to invest themselves in those things that will last. To ground themselves in the love of God that was made known to them from their very creation, to their restoration through the prophets, to finally their renewal in the person of Jesus Christ. He invites them to ground themselves in that love so that they may show God's love to one another. That they may build up that foundation of love that will hold and sustain and renew the whole community. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Those words are not about being miserable, about the fact that we are all going to die, and that we're all terrible sinners, and we all should feel really bad about ourselves. Those words are about a starting place of recognizing our own finitude, the temporariness of our own lives on this earth, and more especially, the fleeting nature of so many of the things we are able to become attached to, the stuff of our lives. With that as a starting place, we are invited to pay attention to those things that will ultimately sustain us and nourish us. The way that God's love is at work in our lives. That's what the practice of fasting is all about. It's about clearing away some of what we are attached to, some of what consumes us, so that we might focus on that which is more life-giving, nurturing, spirit-filling. That is the love of God that is always reaching out to us. From every corner of the universe, from every person we encounter, from this space, or from all the unexpected places in our lives. And it's an invitation to let that love transform us, to transform within us, that we might reach out and be be those restorers of streets to live in, the repairers of the breach, those who loose the thongs of the yoke, who free the captive, who feed the hungry, who clothe the naked, who house the unhoused, who welcome the immigrant and the stranger. All of that is an outpouring of that foundation of God's love. And when we ground ourselves in that, then we may find it to be the way of life and be ultimately life-giving and affirming. I had a chance to visit the city of Coventry in my last year of seminary. We took a trip to go see the current day cathedral. And when they built the cathedral, they had a choice. They could have simply built another church on the same site, cleared out the rubble of the old church, maybe taken some bricks or some beams from it to incorporate into the new. They proposed a similar Gothic structure, just like the one that had been there. But the people of Coventry opted for a different way. Instead of rebuilding on that site, they built a new cathedral next to the ruins and left the ruins as they were. And in those ruins, let a garden grow. So if you visit it today, you can see the ruins of that old cathedral, transformed by life that is springing up within it and through it. It is, like the ashes we receive on our foreheads today, a reminder that all of our endeavors, all of the stuff that we create that fills our lives, will ultimately be reduced to rubble and ash. But what lasts is God's Spirit. It is God's Spirit that animates that place today, both the ruins of the old cathedral and the new. And this season of Lent is an invitation to let God's Spirit renew us, to open ourselves to how God's Spirit is reaching out to us, how it is present within us, and how it is calling us forward to reach out in love to all those who we encounter in our lives. I invite you over these 40 days to come, as we anticipate the celebration of Easter morning, to sit with both the rubble and the ash, but also the hope of renewal and restoration. I hope that we can open ourselves to how God's love is reaching out to us and transforming us, and how it is calling us to share that love.